Have you ever whispered into the silence, why me? Why now? Maybe you said it out loud today, or maybe it echoed inside you so often that you no longer know when it first began. That aching question, why does it never end? Why does life keep unraveling in my hands no matter how much I give, how much I try, how much I believe? You've carried so much for so long that the weight has turned into something invisible. Heavy, but quiet, crushing, yet voiceless. And in that quiet, it's easy to believe no one sees, that nothing makes sense, that your efforts, your hopes, your prayers, they vanish into thin air without a reply. You've done everything right. You've fought to keep going. You've dared to hope when everything around you screamed that hope was foolish. And still, it's like the universe keeps tearing at you, pushing past your limits, stripping away the things that once felt like anchors. Bit by bit, your identity feels like it's crumbling. What used to make you feel whole now lies in pieces. There comes a moment when pain no longer startles you, it just drains you. Like rain falling on already soaked soil, it doesn't shock you anymore. It just seeps in deeper. Faith begins to fracture. The idea that there's some divine plan starts to feel like a cruel joke. You look around for signs and see only closed doors. But despite all of it, despite the silence and the aching and the void, you're still here. Listening, watching, searching. Maybe not because you still believe, but because you don't know what else to do. Maybe the version of you that used to pretend everything was okay has finally cracked. And in that rawness where masks fall away, something unexpected begins to stir. Something real. What if this pain isn't random? What if the ache you carry isn't a punishment or a mistake? What if it's a passage, a forging, a mysterious, terrifying, and sacred initiation into something greater? Part 1. The hidden hand behind the breaking pain rarely announces its purpose. It doesn't knock politely or arrive with an explanation. It comes like a thief, sudden, disorienting, merciless. It rips the familiar from your grasp and leaves you standing in the rubble of a life you thought you understood. Everything that once brought clarity now seems blurred. What once gave you comfort now feels distant or completely gone. You question what's left and why. And yet beneath this storm of confusion, there is an unseen precision at work. A force quietly unfolding something that human eyes can't yet perceive. We live in a world obsessed with avoiding pain. Our culture celebrates shortcuts. It sells us ease and markets instant success like a product on sale. You're told to find comfort to pursue what's easy to avoid what hurts. But the deeper truths of existence don't live in comfort. They are born in contrast. They grow in discomfort, and often they rise through suffering. The universe, as mysterious as it is, doesn't waste a single tear. It does not operate in chaos, even if life sometimes looks chaotic. Every heartbreak, every delay, every betrayal, each one carries meaning, though that meaning may be buried deep in the soil of time and patience. In the grand economy of the cosmos, pain is not a punishment. It is a process. Not a cruel force that destroys, but a fire that refines. A sculptor that chisels away all that is false, all that is fragile, all that is hollow. Before something powerful can rise within you, the shallow must be cleared away. For a soul can become a sanctuary, it must first be emptied. That breaking point you're experiencing, it's not aimless, it's not reckless, it is sacred. It is the work of a skilled hand, a hidden hand guiding you into transformation. We forget that most growth begins in darkness. Seeds do not sprout in the sun. They push through soil, alone, unseen. Caterpillars don't become butterflies in light. They dissolve in silence into something unrecognizable before they emerge transformed. Becoming isn't beautiful. It looks like falling apart. And when you stand in the middle of your broken pieces, it's hard to believe anything is being built. But beneath what looks like ruin, the architecture of a new life begins to form. The breaking isn't meant to reduce you. It's meant to realign you. Old frameworks are crumbling. The scaffolding of who you thought you had to be, of false identities, unfulfilled expectations, borrowed beliefs, it's being dismantled. Why? Because you're being prepared to rise, not in the image of the world's approval, but in the truth of who you are. You haven't been discarded, you've been planted. Buried not in punishment, but in purpose. Yes, you may be in a season you didn't choose, in a kind of soil you don't understand. But make no mistake, your roots are growing, not visible to others, not even visible to you yet, but they are digging deep, anchoring you in something far more enduring than what was lost. Each heartbreak becomes compost. It fertilizes wisdom. Each silence trains you to listen differently, more deeply. And slowly, oh so slowly, the soul begins to reorient itself, not around what it used to be, but around what it is becoming. The ache itself becomes the architect of depth. And in the stillness of your suffering, the noise of ego softens, the performance fades, and in its place you begin to hear something else, something older than words, more eternal than circumstance. The universe does not rush. It is not moved by instant success. It shapes destiny with time, with silence, with shadow. It carves significance where there once was just ambition. And the more you are hollowed, the more space there is for something sacred to move in. What felt like loss may be protection. What looked like failure could be the beginning of foundation. Brokenness in divine hands is never the end of the story. It is the beginning of revelation. Not the kind you read in books, but the kind you feel in your bones. When your illusions are stripped away, when the roles and rules you live by collapse, what remains is what's real. And in that space where your hands are finally empty, something extraordinary starts to take shape. Clarity, depth, purpose. The breaking doesn't bury you, it births you. Though you may not see it now, the same hand that allowed the pain is also preparing your rising. The hidden hand behind the breaking is not cruel, it is deliberate. And from that place flows a fire not to destroy, but to refine. That fire speaks a language not of comfort, but of transformation. And those who learn its language discover a strength the world cannot touch. The furnace becomes your classroom. Pain becomes your vocabulary. What once were surface prayers become groans too deep for words. And those groans, they aren't pleas for ease. They are calls for awakening. Fire asks no permission. It burns, and in its heat, it makes things known. The false self cannot survive the flame. The ego-built ambitions burned away. The plans born in fear, melted. The attachments that once gave you your name, gone. And what remains is what lasts. Faith that isn't rooted in outcomes. Love that doesn't beg for validation. Purpose that doesn't collapse under pressure. This is not the death of you. It is the death of what was never truly you. There are truths that only those with scar tissue can carry, not because those truths are too intellectual, but because they must be felt. Words birthed in comfort often sound hollow to the hurting. But words born in the flame, they carry weight. They cut through, they don't echo, they resonate. And the soul that has endured the furnace learns a different language. It speaks less to be heard and more to be understood. And in that understanding, there is a new kind of authority. Not the authority of control, but the authority of presence. People begin to listen, not because you speak louder, but because what you say has been lived. So the fire, my friend, is not the end. It is the beginning of voice, of authenticity, of depth. Your soul doesn't emerge unburned, but it emerges rare. It emerges real. And it no longer fears the silence of the universe because it has learned something most never do. Silence is not absence, it is intimacy. You have become fluent in the language of fire, and now you carry the quiet strength only those who have suffered deeply can ever understand. Part 2. Vessels of scars and carriers of light. And so after the fire, something in you shifts. Not just in the way the world looks at you, but in the way you look at the world. After everything you've endured, something deeper awakens quietly but unmistakably. The desperate urgency to prove yourself fades. The longing to be seen, validated, or understood no longer drives your steps. Instead, there's a presence, a quiet strength, and you realize you're no longer seeking the spotlight. You're carrying something far more powerful: evidence. Evidence that you've walked through fire and lived, that you've been broken and rebuilt, not perfectly, but authentically, that you've not just survived, but evolved. Where the world once measured value in perfection, the universe seems to honor a different currency: scars. Not the invisible ones we've learned to hide, but the raw, honest, unfiltered marks that say, yes, I was there. Yes, I fell. But I got back up. These scars aren't blemishes. They are badges. They bear witness to survival, not from a place of bitterness, but of deep lived wisdom. They tell stories words often fail to capture. A scar can whisper what no voice dares to say. I've known what it means to fall apart. I've known what it means to rise again. In a world drenched in performance, nothing draws us in more than authenticity, realness, stillness. The ones who have suffered deeply, who chose healing instead of hiding, carry a light that needs no announcement. They don't speak louder, they don't demand attention, and yet people are drawn to them. Why? Because pain that has been transformed does not shine with arrogance. It glows with grace. It draws others not with doctrine, not with arguments, but with quiet proof, with presence. This kind of presence isn't something that can be manufactured. It cannot be bought or taught. It is lived into, and when someone has walked through suffering and come out on the other side, healed, humbled, honest people can feel it. There's a gravitational pull in their presence, a magnetic clarity in their stillness. They don't carry the light, they are the light. But it's not a harsh, blinding light. It doesn't boast or dominate. It guides gently. It beckons those still drowning in chaos, not by preaching, but by existing. It offers no blueprint, only testimony. Not theory, but truth embodied. Pain, when transformed, becomes power. But not the kind the world seeks, the kind that overpowers or conquers. No, this power is steady, subtle, stabilizing. It doesn't need to prove itself because it knows itself. When you've bled, when you've been broken and stitched back together by grace, you stop fearing imperfection. You embrace it. You no longer speak as someone trying to convince others of what's true. You speak as someone who is the proof. Every step you take after the breaking becomes part of a quiet sermon, a sermon that doesn't need applause. It doesn't demand agreement. It simply needs to be walked. Because the universe doesn't call the untouched. It chooses the touched, the wounded, the ones who now walk slower, perhaps more carefully, but who carry something sacred in their silence. Healing doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't rewrite your past. It reassigns it. The betrayal, the abandonment, the failure, they don't disappear. They become part of the offering. There is a strange and beautiful paradox at work. The most shattered vessels often become the most radiant ones. Why? Because light doesn't just bounce off polished surfaces, it seeps through cracks. It spills through the broken. And in those broken places, others begin to recognize their own pain, their own healing, their own possibility. You no longer offer theory, you offer truth. Not to place yourself on a pedestal, but to quietly remind others rising is possible. The universe does not elevate the flawless, it lifts the surrendered. And a surrendered heart isn't one that's never known suffering, it's one that has survived its own collapse. And that survival gives a person a kind of authority, not the loud kind, not the kind that commands attention, but the kind that whispers directly into someone else's darkness and says, "You're not alone. I've been there. You will make it through." Because when your healing is real, your life stops being just your own. It becomes a mirror, a compass, a quiet torch for those still stumbling through the night. And that's the true miracle. Your scars, the very ones that once filled you with shame, now shine. They become vessels, not of damage, but of light. And in that realization, something profound begins to unfold. Surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, not the kind born of exhaustion or fear, but a surrender born of revelation. You finally see that gripping tightly, trying to control everything, everyone, every outcome was never strength. It was survival. And it came from fear. But pain has revealed something essential. Control is an illusion. You no longer feel the need to force the universe to bend to your will. You begin to move differently, to live with an openness that says, I don't need to know everything. I just need to trust the rhythm. In that alignment, surrender stops being a weakness. It becomes a portal to power. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means loosening your grip on what you thought life had to be and trusting the unseen wisdom that led you through the breaking to now guide you through the becoming. True surrender isn't passive. It's not giving in, it's stepping into flow, into alignment, into something ancient and steady. And it takes more courage to release than to resist. But once you do, something shifts. A sacred space opens. A space where pride once ruled now softens. Where fear once whispered now quiets. Where ego once clung now releases. That space becomes a chamber, a sanctuary. And within it, something divine begins to move. Not a power that dominates, but one that flows effortless, clear and exact. You begin to realize divine strength doesn't look like worldly power. It isn't loud. It isn't performative. The universe doesn't move through competition. It moves through positioning. And that position is always low, not in value, but in posture. Surrender says I'm no longer trying to become who I think I should be. I'm becoming who I was always meant to be. And in that becoming, burdens lift. The noise of striving dims. Clarity sharpens. You're no longer chasing recognition, approval, or success. You're simply present. And in that presence, doors begin to open, not just around you, but within you. The paradox reveals itself. In losing control, you gain connection. In giving up the fight to manage every detail, you access something infinitely more powerful, peace. And finally, you see it, all of it. Your past, with every scar, every failure, every fall, was never meant to disqualify you. It was preparing you. It became the very structure of your soul, the architecture of your becoming. Not something to be erased, but something to be revealed. You realize surrender was never about losing who you are. It was about uncovering it. Beneath the layers of pressure and pretending was someone shaped not for applause, but for purpose. And now, with no need to strive, you begin to move differently. Decisions aren't forced, they're felt. Direction doesn't come from pressure, it rises from peace. You live in rhythm with the universe, quiet, unshaken, undeniable. And the weight you once carried, it transforms, not into baggage, but into presence. You're no longer trying to shine. You are the light, not by effort, but by surrender, not by tightening your grip, but by finally letting go. Part 3, From Ruin to Rebirth. And so as surrender quiets, the war within, something even more extraordinary begins to unfold. You start to move differently in the world. The pieces of your life, the ones that once felt scattered and useless, slowly begin to rearrange themselves. What once looked like ruin starts to form the shape of something new. Not perfect, not polished, but powerful, present, honest. The raw edges remain, but they now speak of survival, not shame. You no longer reach for the life you once had. You begin to live the life that's emerging now, one forged through fire and made whole not in appearance but in purpose. What felt like devastation slowly begins to reveal its true form, not as punishment but as divine design. The universe doesn't restore by rewinding time. It doesn't return things to how they used to be. Instead, it redeems by rewriting meaning. Your scars, those marks you once tried to hide, become sacred script. Each line, each memory etched into your soul now tells a story not of brokenness, but of resilience. They aren't signs of weakness. They're the evidence that something tried to destroy you and failed. What once was pain has become the ink with which compassion writes its deepest truths. Now, when someone meets you, they don't just encounter a person, they encounter a presence that has known the furnace and still holds warmth in their hands. You haven't hardened. You haven't shut down. You've become someone who can stand in the heat and reach out to another. Someone who can hold another's pain without being swallowed by it. There is a quiet strength that rises from ruins. You begin to understand life not in simple black and white lines, but in layers. Where once you responded with anger, now you answer with humility. Where once you trembled in fear, now you are rooted. Pain no longer defines you. It's no longer the place you live, it's the place you learned. It has become a reference point, not a residence. The storms that nearly drowned you have recalibrated your values. Joy becomes simpler, found in the smallest, realest things. Peace becomes more sacred. And faith, true faith, it's no longer something you preach. It's something you carry, something you walk with. You've stopped clinging to certainty. You've learned to walk with trust. This transformation doesn't arrive with trumpets. There are no grand gestures, no announcements. It slips in like morning light, subtle, steady. One day you realize you're no longer reacting from fear. You're responding from wisdom. Where once you begged for answers, now you offer presence. Where you demanded reasons, now you extend understanding. And people begin to notice. Not because you're louder, not because you've become more impressive, but because you're real. Because redemption has altered your very posture. You stand taller not because you're untouched, but because you've learned how to walk with the pieces. You are no longer a victim of your story. You have become a vessel of its power. The ruins remain, but they've been rearranged into something useful, something beautiful, something sacred. The universe didn't erase your past. It repurposed it. Every step you take now becomes a quiet declaration. The breaking didn't end me. It equipped me. What once was a story of mere survival now begins to shine beyond the borders of your own life. You didn't set out to be a beacon, but you became one anyway, simply because you walked through fire and didn't lose your light. People aren't drawn to your perfection. They're drawn to your presence. There's a gravity in your energy now, a quiet authority that doesn't demand attention. It just is. You no longer speak as someone who read about the storm. You speak as someone who stood in its center, felt its winds tear through you, cried through its silence, and yet emerged still breathing, still burning with purpose. The light you now carry was forged in darkness. And because of that origin, it holds a depth no spotlight could ever replicate. There's a weight in the voice of someone who has suffered and survived. It offers not pity, but empathy, not superiority, but truth. When people look at your life now, they don't see someone who avoided the fall. They see someone who learned how to rise. And in that rising, your story becomes a mirror, a map, a glimpse of possibility, a reflection of healing for those who are still lost in the dark. Not everyone will understand what you carry. Not everyone will recognize what it cost you. But the ones who are meant to find you, they will. And when they do, your scars will speak to them in a language they didn't know they needed, the silent language of recognition. Being a beacon doesn't mean having all the answers. It means staying lit even when the wind tries to blow you out. It means being honest about the journey, refusing to fake wholeness just to make others comfortable. The cracks in your foundation. They're no longer weaknesses. They're windows through which the light escapes. You don't need a stage or a spotlight. Your presence is the message. Without striving, you become an invitation. A whisper to others that says, it's okay to feel. It's okay to heal. It's okay to believe again. The universe isn't reaching the world through your perfection. It's reaching through your redemption. You've become living proof that healing is not only possible, it's real. That growth doesn't happen despite pain, but through it. And that pain does not have the final word. Where others hide their stories out of shame, you carry yours like a torch. Because you know there's someone out there still walking through the night, still trying to find the path, still hoping the darkness doesn't mean the end. And now what nearly destroyed you becomes a map guiding others, not toward you, but toward the presence that led you through. You are not the destination, you are the evidence that the path exists. In the end, pain, when viewed through the lens of eternity, is never meaningless. It becomes the very path by which we are refined, humbled, and commissioned. The universe does not allow pain to break you down, but to build you up into something deeper, truer, unshakable. So if you find yourself hurting, doubting, or questioning your worth in the shadows, hold this close. The darkness you walk through today may very well be the sacred ground where your roots are taking hold. And when you rise, and you will rise, you will understand the pain was never the end. It was the beginning of everything you were always meant to become.